left off discussing how stigma and discrimination can affect some of the health outcomes of people living with HIV based on their experiences with medical providers. And I wanted to go into explaining a little bit about intersectionality, which is something that I briefly discussed earlier. So if we can go back to our slides, so your PowerPoint, and wrap this webinar up, that's what we will do. So now that we spent quite a bit of time on HIV and AIDS-related stigma, it's time to bring it back to those other aspects of cultural identity. And intersectionality is a term that's used to describe the ways in which oppressive institutions like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, classism, and any other ism or phobia you could think of are interconnected and that they can't be examined separately from each other. We have to keep in mind that lots of people living with HIV are experiencing stigma and discrimination based on other aspects of their identity. And it's really important to be conscious of how these different forms of oppression interact with each other and can affect your clients. So for example, if your client's HIV positive, they might be stigmatized for that reason, right? But what if they're HIV positive and transgender and homeless? Or what if they're HIV positive and they're a monolingual Spanish-speaking Latino woman, right? Individuals living at these intersections are experiencing extremely complex and interconnected forms of stigmatization and discrimination. And intersectionality is another reason that practicing cultural humility is so important to achieving better health outcomes for your clients. So let's talk about how we can sort of set up this trusting relationship with their client. In beginning a client visit, you want to allow the client to feel comfortable when they're discussing their health concerns. And the patient or client interview is a really good time to set this comfortable tone and guide the participant in understanding relevant health topics. So you want to take their medical history or whatever questions that you have to ask them, risk assessment, whatever intake questions that you ask, as a dialogue rather than a checklist. You want it to be conversational as opposed to you just like reading them questions and then marking boxes on your forms, right? You want to treat any sensitive topics like sex or substance use as routine questions that you use for all clients or all patients. And you want to make sure that when you're discussing these sensitive topics, you're doing so in this really non-judgmental tone, and that your body language isn't judgmental either. So if patients feel like their questions are targeted towards them because of how they look or how they identify, they might feel really guarded or apprehensive. And you'll always want to ask them, do you have any other problems, or do you have any other concerns or questions, or is there anything else that you want to get checked out while you're here? Because oftentimes the main problem that they're having isn't really the reason that they came in, right? And conversations can sometimes get really tangential, but show that you care by just allowing them to discuss these topics. Don't cut them off. Don't shorten their lines of questioning. So now let's take a look at some concrete steps that you can utilize to create a welcoming environment for clients and patients. So it's really important to think about how we can create this sort of environment for people at every single level of interaction, from the receptionist to the case manager, to the service navigator, to the healthcare provider, and any other people that they might be coming into contact in between. And there are 6 really important ways to create this welcoming environment for individuals. You see the list of them here. I'm going to go over them in detail. So the first is language. Using the right words can really help establish a trusting relationship between you and your clients. And the wrong words can make a bad situation even worse by just building new barriers to care. So listen to your patients and listen to how they describe their own identities. Reflect their choice of language. And be aware that although lots of populations of people might have reclaimed some historically derogatory words to describe themselves, they might not be appropriate for you to use as a medical provider or a service provider if you haven't yet sort of developed this trusting and respectful rapport with them. And if you're in doubt as to how to refer to a patient or client, ask them what phrase they prefer. Also, try to avoid labeling clients without them proposing a term for themselves. So for example, avoid using a term like gay with a client, even if they have indicated that they have a same-sex sex partner. If the client themselves haven't indicated a particular identity label, using that label might cause some alienation, it might lead to mistrust, and it can interfere with information gathering and appropriate care. And you can really think about someone who's a non-gay identified MSM and how calling them gay might make them react. Another thing to remember is that lots of people, especially young people, are unlikely to self-identify using traditional labels. And the key is to follow the patient's lead about their self-description. And that's going to build respect and trust. And it's also going to help explore how their identities relate to their current or potential medical needs. So this is an exploring moment for you in thinking about self-awareness. Discussions that make you uncomfortable are areas that you need to work on, right? If you've got a client that comes in and is using language that makes you uncomfortable, it's going to show in your body language. So take some time to do some research, find out what words are used in the community. Our second step in creating a welcoming environment involves the expectations of the client. So you're probably not the first service provider or medical provider that your client has interacted with or met, right? And if they've experienced insensitivity or a lack of awareness or any discrimination, they might be feeling really guarded or ready for more of those same kinds of behaviors from you. So think back to that long and complicated history that our clients have with the medical industrial complex. And don't be surprised if even if a mistake, like even an honest mistake, results in this really intense emotional reaction. Think back to what we learned earlier about microaggressions, right? Apologizing for your mistakes or correcting your colleagues or coworkers when they make mistakes can really help diffuse a difficult situation and reestablish that constructive dialogue about the need for care. And when I'm talking about correcting colleagues, we want to keep in mind that we want to create this environment of accountability, right? Don't be afraid to correct your coworkers if they say something that's insensitive. Creating an environment of accountability and respect requires everybody to work together. Our third step involves practical thinking. So problem-solving skills can be applied in all of our interactions with our patients or clients. And many of the bad experiences that our clients have had engaging with healthcare systems or supportive systems are similar to those that would frustrate anybody. So for example, clients might not have health insurance. If they do, they might not really understand their coverage. They might have been unable to express the nature of their health concerns because they don't trust you or because they're nervous about coming to the clinic. You have to keep in mind that you might not be able to solve all of a client's problems in one session or ever, but if you help a client feel comfortable in what might be a really tense time for them, that's an important role of your job as a healthcare provider or a service provider. So for the best outcomes, your clients have to be cared for holistically. And this potentially gives you an opportunity to make referrals to other supportive services, other medical providers, and all of these sorts of things will help improve an individual's access to care. So our fourth step involves avoiding asking unnecessary questions. So people can be really curious about the lives of their clients or the different aspects of their cultural identities, which can sometimes lead them to want to learn more and ask lots of questions. But clients might not feel comfortable asking these questions. So before you ask any personal questions, first ask yourself, is this question really necessary for the patient's care, or am I asking it for my own curiosity? And if it's for your own curiosity, it's probably not appropriate to ask, right? Think instead about what do I know, what do I need to know, and how can I ask for the information that I need to know in a sensitive way? The fifth step involves sort of understanding the diversity of expression. So please be aware that there's a wide range of identities and expressions and that these could change over time, right? And that labels mean different things to different people. So it's important to understand that individuals might not accept certain identity labels, even if their behaviors or expressions are similar to those who utilize those same labels. Our overall goal is to make sure that our clients feel comfortable discussing their behaviors and concerns so that we can provide them with the full range of options of care. Our final step in creating this supportive environment involves maintaining a non-judgmental attitude. So make sure your patients or clients feel safe and welcome when they're coming to see you. And that means keeping an open mind about different behaviors, different identities, different expressions, different sort of group memberships. It's really important to avoid showing any disapproval or surprise when you're having conversations with your clients. So check your body language, check your facial expressions to make sure that you're not sending any unintended messages. Are you shaking your head when somebody says something to you? Are you wrinkling your nose? Are you maintaining eye contact? Are you like kind of jerking away from your client when they reveal something to you that you're surprised by or put off by, right? Make sure that your body language is in check. Make sure your facial expressions are in check. Nonverbal communication is really important, and we want to make sure that our clients feel comfortable talking to us so that we can, again, provide them the full range of options of care that they need based on whatever situations that they're going through. So the key takeaway messages for practicing cultural humility: just assist patients in healthy discovery, autonomy, so like helping them support their ability to care for themselves, helping them accept themselves based on their identity, create this open and honest dialogue, maintain a non-judgmental tone, make sure that whatever discussions you're having with your clients stay between them and your clients, and if you have to share it, make sure that you have a release of information or, you know, you're sharing it based on the needs of the client, things that are shared on a need-to-know basis. And work with your patients or clients to find different sources of support, whether at home or in the community. And be prepared with referrals and resources to help you link those to those sources. So as far as our content for our webinar goes, that's it. So we will now be taking some time to answer questions. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to put into the chat box, we will certainly review those, and I will do my best to answer them. So, you know, we definitely covered a lot of information. I would imagine that some of you have some questions about some of the content that we have discussed. Please do not be shy. Feel free to ask whatever you want to ask. Again, you know, being in an online forum gives you a certain level of anonymity. You don't have to raise your hand and have people looking at you, right? So feel free to type those questions into that chat box. So it looks like we have a question. And that question is?
What is the most overwhelming reasons for internal or felt stigma?
So what are the most overwhelming reasons for internal or felt stigma? So this isn't something that I can answer based on my own experience because everyone is different, right? However, in working in direct service, I can tell you that probably the biggest reason for internal stigma was that people, once they find out that they were living with HIV, their main concern wasn't, oh, how is this going to affect my health? Am I going to have to be on medication? Am I going to be getting sick? Their biggest concerns were about sex and interpersonal relationships. And mainly, am I going to find someone that I can be with, right? Their greatest fear was that if they found out that they were living with HIV, or once they were diagnosed with HIV, that they wouldn't have anyone that would love them. Or they would end up being alone based on their status, that they would experience rejection based on that status, which is true. It does happen, but sometimes that felt or internal stigma can be even more overwhelming than the actual experiences of stigma. And there was a study done, and I know it was on a previous version of an e-course. I'm not sure if it is on our current e-course, but if not, we can get you the link to that, certainly. But it showed that self-stigma was actually showed up more than the actual external stigma, right? So people were rejected based on disclosing their HIV status, but not quite as much as they expected to be. So it's a really important thing to think about when working with your clients is that internal stigma and that sort of fear of rejection. Do we have any other questions?
Yes. Melissa said, how can we effectively address microaggressions when faced with them?
Okay, so this is a really great question. Thank you. Microaggressions. So they can be really difficult to address, right? Because they fly under the radar, and people who are perpetrating them, again, they don't intend to always, so it can sometimes be really hard to get them to understand. And a technique that I like to use when addressing microaggressions is something I like to call guided empathy. I don't know if that term has already been coined. Hopefully I made it up and it's something original. But it involves connecting that microaggression to an aspect of the perpetrator's identity. So I'll give you guys a little example. When I was in high school and college, like everything that everybody said all the time was "that's gay," right? Anytime they didn't like something, they thought something was stupid or whatever, they would say "that's gay, that's gay, that's gay." And that was what everybody said. It was totally accepted, right? When I came out, I was walking with a friend who I had gone to college with, and I think we were still in school at the time. I had recently came out, and my friend is from India, right? She lived in India until she was about 6 years old and moved to New York, where we're from. And she asked me, she made a comment about something, and she was like, "Oh, that's so gay." And I looked at her, and she said, "You don't get offended when I say things like that, do you? When I say that's so gay?" I said, no, I don't get offended. I said, but from now on, instead of saying that's gay, I'm going to say that's Indian, and I'll see how you like it. And then she just turned and looked at me, and she goes, "Oh, okay, I understand now," right? So just an example of how you can take an aspect of a person's identity, connect it to a microaggression, and sort of get them to empathize with whatever you're going through when you hear that comment. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, so Santos is saying, how can we help the stressors and anxieties of gender non-conforming folks who keep being called the wrong pronoun?
That is a good question and a very, very tough question. Can you repeat that? How can we
help the stressors and anxieties?
Well, personally, it involves sort of being respectful of those pronouns, right? And again, everyone is going to make mistakes, even if you have the best intentions. We have to try to be as respectful as possible. We have to correct sort of what we think about gender growing up, and understand that it is fluid and something that can change, and that it's up to sometimes a matter of personal choice of how someone wants to identify. And it has to be respected. We also need to make sure, as sort of doing our part in quelling that anxiety or sort of reducing that stress, again, correcting other people. If you have someone else who doesn't respect a person's gender identity and they're calling them by the wrong pronoun, speaking up about that, telling them, listen, it's not for you to decide whether or not that's right or wrong. It's not for you to decide whether or not they should be identifying how you think they should to fit into some social construct that's essentially made up, right? People have to take control of their own identities, and it's something that needs to be respected. So just explain those things to people, correct them when you hear them, and do some work in examining your own beliefs about gender, figuring out how you can respect those identities and help others to learn how to respect those identities as well.
Okay, so we're still waiting for more questions. So we have a few more minutes left. So Alex, if you want to wrap up while we're waiting.
Yeah, I want to just thank you all for participating in this webinar. You guys have given some great responses and some great questions. I want to know also if anyone has any responses to the questions that were asked that you feel like I wasn't fully able to address. Also, feel free to put those responses in the chat box. So any time for last questions or concerns?
So we will go ahead and just show your contact info while we're waiting for more questions.
So yeah, well, we're going to put up a contact slide now. So like Melissa said, we do trainings and consultations for different HIV prevention strategies. So you can contact us about that if you need some sort of consulting work done, or if you need a training done in one of the interventions that we train in. Also, if you have any questions about the webinar, or want us to even come and do something like this on site with your own populations or your own staff at your organizations, feel free to email us, and we can set up how we can coordinate something like that.